Luke chapter 16 is our text for this morning. Luke 16, as we continue in our series on the parables. In early 2006, a man by the name of Michael Burry was a hedge fund manager who was studying the housing market and noticed a big problem. Banks had been giving out bad loans to people who probably couldn't pay them back in order to make a quick dime. These people who got these loans would probably not be able to pay them back, especially after the interest rate adjusted on their adjustable rate mortgages. And so he went to the banks and persuaded them to buy insurance on those mortgages. Insurance policies that paid out if the people failed to pay back their mortgages. He bought them himself. And then in 2007, 2008, when the bad mortgages interest rates adjusted, people started to not be able to pay off their mortgages. The banks, Michael Burry and others, made a killing on insurance payouts on failed mortgages. While other banks and insurance companies collapsed and were bailed out by the United States government, and while millions of families lost their homes and their jobs, their life savings, their retirements, Burry made $700 million for his firm and $100 million for himself. In today's parable, Jesus is going to tell you to be like Michael Burry. I know it's weird. But there's something that Michael Burry and other guys like him, Greg Lippman, John Paulson, who took advantage of the 2008 crash for their own future security, there's some redeemable aspect of their character that is missing in much of Christianity for many Christians. See, we're told that we're supposed to be nice Christians and who live nice lives. We're nice to the people around us. We love people. We give a little, and we live moral, upright lives, safe in our single bedroom or our home. And as nice Christians, we work hard and then retire and then go through various seasons of life and then end our gentle, nice existence. And there's something in that description of American Christianity that's missing out on a large portion of what the New Testament calls discipleship. There's this get at it, get out of my way, I'm on a mission, I have a singular focus, there's this discontent energy, this aggressive drive that's missing from that American Christianity simple, gentle life. In a way that outpaces Wall Street investors, CEOs, politicians, even the most worldly organizations on the planet, Christians are driven. They're called to be singularly focused, aggressive, unyielding to the calling that God has given them. Look at Luke chapter 16, verse 1. Jesus, he also said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager.' And the manager said to himself, 'What shall I do since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm too ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 measures of oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'How much do you owe?' And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. Let me address a few obvious things at first. This is a weird parable. It stands out amongst all the parables that we've been going over for months. There's no hero in this text, no moral person, no one that we read and we're like, oh, I want to put this into my children's Bible so that my kids would learn to be like that person. In most parables, there's at least a master or a father who represents God, and you might have that here, but it's debatable. There's often a bad cop or a good cop in the parable, right? A Samaritan or a brother, a farmer, who's either Christ himself in the parable, like we learned last week in the Good Samaritan, or at least a moral example for Christ followers. But none of that exists in this parable. And because of that, theologians, pastors, preachers have had a hard time with this parable, and many theologians have tried to fix this, to make the dishonest manager a little bit more honest. Some have assumed that the dishonest manager was only giving away his commission when he was cutting a percentage off of the debts of those who owed his master. Others have thought that he was righting a wrong by correcting his master's illegal interest that was charged against debts to the people, and that was not allowed according to the Torah, the Mosaic law. And all those attempts to make the dishonest manager more honest, I think, fail. They're not in the text. You'd have to read them into the culture and the historical setting, and it doesn't actually work. He's just stealing. That's why Jesus himself calls him a dishonest manager. He's a dishonest manager. Now, let's stop here for a moment and just look into that word manager, because I think it's something that we need to come to grips with this morning, okay? And that's actually point number 1 on your outline this morning is I am a steward, which means nothing belongs to me and I have a job to do. I am a steward, which means nothing belongs to me and I have a job to do. Notice some things about this parable right at the outset. In verse 1, Luke begins by saying, he also said to the disciples. A few things that short phrase tells us. Number 1, he also said to the disciples, also highlights that the fact that this parable is connected to the parables that came before. The parable of the lost coin, the parable of the lost sheep, and the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son. They're connected. They're spoken of in the same sermon set. But the focus has been, according to verse 1, gone away from the Pharisees and the whole crowd. And Jesus is now aiming this parable at the disciples. The parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son were aimed at the lost and the true presentation of the gospel. Self-righteous hypocrites who believed that they were saved and that God was pleased with them because of their obedience. They needed to learn that God loves finding lost things. The lost needed to learn that they were exactly who Christ came to die for. That whole is the focus of all the parables in chapter 15. But in chapter 16, Jesus turns his attention away from those who needed to hear the gospel to the lost and focused it upon his disciples, the followers of Jesus. This isn't for the Pharisees, although they're backhandedly addressed. And Paul and Luke and Jesus in this parable puts the people into the position of what the ESV calls managers. In your outline point, I call it stewards. I think that's a better word that we need to reclaim in English. The ESV translates it stewards, manager. Other English translations translate it steward. When I hear the word manager, I think of a middle management guy who's telling you to wear your name tag. I think that has more to do with me and my job experience than what actual real managers do. But you hear the word stewardship. And a lot of us think that, okay, stewardship, if you're a Christian, perhaps you've heard the word before. Maybe some of you are anticipating a sermon about giving and generosity. But stewardship isn't about money, it's about life. The Greek word, oikonomia, what does that sound like? Economy, oikonomia. It's made up of two other words. It's a compound word, the word for house or household, and nomos, the word for law. So oika and nomos means house law. In other words, the manager or the steward brought the law. He was the law for the house. He ruled the house. Related to the word economy, this idea of stewardship is clearly presented in the text. It is a normal aspect of everyday life in the New Testament. Those who had assets would, in the same way today, you would hire a tax accountant and you would hire, all these different attorneys and things. They would steward your assets. They would watch your retirement for you. They would invest these things. Those people in the New Testament times would have managers who were in charge of everything. Everything. Stewardship even over the home, the repairs, the children, according to the Apostle Paul, talks about it in Galatians. A steward is one who had authority over all the master's resources and could transact business in his name. That's what a steward is. They had been given authority by the owner to do things on the owner's behalf. And so the first obvious aspect of stewardship, twofold. Number one is, it doesn't belong to you. Nothing belongs to me. It's not mine. It doesn't belong to me. It's not for me to do with what I want. It's not for me to get out of it what I desire. If I'm a steward, I'm using it for the glory of the master. This is a fascinating and necessary reality. And this is why I think it's so sad that we've turned stewardship into financial conversations as Christians. Because, again, stewardship isn't about money, it's about life. In many ways, we've found polite ways to disobey Scripture. I'm always rallying against these things. I hate them. Christian culture, polite ways to not make disciples and make the Christian life easier and lazier. I think even some of our teaching has, on generosity, has brought this up. It came up in a men's breakfast that we just recently had. The conversation of tithing, right? Tithing. I give 10% to God, and then the other 90% I use for normal expenses. 10% belongs to God, the rest is yours, and that's just wrong. It all belongs to God. And I don't care what you give to the church, what percentage, as long as you give it joyfully, sacrificially. But even what you don't give to the church, that's not yours either. That's not for you. That is also the master's money. It's just used to glorify him in a different aspect of your life. Not the church. The money that you use, the other 90%, if you will, and we don't believe in the 10% here, but the other percentage, what you're not giving the church, that's used to disciple and steward your family, to minister to your family, to display the love of God, the goodness of God, the providence of God as you care for and provide for their family, your children. When you're saving up for a vacation, it's used for the discipleship and rearing and training of your children, for family time, for the understanding of love, for the display of the fatherhood of God, and all of those things. It's not for you. None of it belongs to you. And so American Christians have this misunderstanding of stewardship. They think stewardship is something that they do, but instead it's actually something that they are. The reason they don't understand stewardship is because they have a small view of the sovereignty of God. Small, anemic view of the sovereignty of God. Even the Calvinists in the room. The sovereignty of God is not just a theological idea. It's a life system. It's a way to see the world, to understand the world that we live in. It's not just that God is in control of all things, which, yes, of course, is true. It's a comprehensive way to see what God wants done in the world that he is in control of. It's not just about election and predestination and who did what for salvation. It goes beyond that. The sovereignty of God is much bigger than just who initiated salvation, who chose who. So allow me this morning to just expand your understanding of the sovereignty of God beyond just the doctrine of salvation into the doctrine of how you see the entire world at large. Sovereignty means this: every sphere of our existence is ruled by God and designed by God to be carried out his way. The sovereignty of God means that every sphere of life, your family, the church, the state, education, economy, the arts, science, nature, housing, farming, services, healthcare, all of these areas are under the authority and rulership of God Almighty. He has designed all of them for his creation, for his glory, to be executed and carried out in the way in which he has designed. That is the sovereignty of God over all things. Not just that he controls every molecule, but that he has designed every aspect of life, every aspect of our society, community, culture, politics, government. He has a design on them, and they're to be carried out his way. You're a steward of the sovereign God of the universe. You can see that all the way in the very beginning in the book of Genesis. God creates man. He creates woman in his image. And he tells them, be fruitful and multiply. Have dominion over all the created world. He puts them in a garden. He tells them to work it and to keep it. Outside the garden is wilderness, untamed, unruly. That humanity is to turn into a garden. But then sin enters in, right? Sin enters in and breaks the design of God. We begin to believe that we're our own masters. That we should use what we have for ourselves. Sin breaks the design. Sin breaks the layers of the spheres of authority, the spheres in which God created all these things to live. And even the lions start breaking out of their created design. Diseases and bacteria start doing the things that they're not supposed to do outside of the sovereign design of God. Sin broke these things. Christ, through his life, death, and resurrection, the Holy Spirit, through the giving of new life, has saved us from our own lordship over our own lives. He saved us from the futile ways of trying to take this fallen world and to make it our own and to use it for ourselves. He saved us from the destruction of living self-centered lives by opening up our eyes by paying for our sin, by giving us new life. He has brought us back into alignment with the created purpose for which God made us. We're stewards. We're stewards. Stewardship is more than just the management of your time, your possessions, your money, your health. Stewardship is our calling in the world to align whatever aspects of society that we are engaged in to God's will. Okay, let me make it simple. Your work is God's work. Your work is God's work. I don't know where you stand in the whole line of economy, what you're doing to make a paycheck, what you've given your life to as a career. Maybe you're an accountant. Maybe you're raising children. Maybe you're a teacher. But whatever aspect of society that you've chosen to engage in, that you use to earn a paycheck and to make money, it's more than just a paycheck. It's a calling. It's a vocation. It's a ministry. It's a ministry. Your work is God's work. I remember I was talking to a friend from a previous church. He was a distributor for a pickle company. That means he got grocery stores to sell jars of pickles. And he was relating to me the unfulfillment in that work and how he wanted to do God's work. And he was jealous because I was a young man with a young family, going to seminary, learning to do ministry, and he was telling me, oh man, I'm so looking forward to doing the real work. His plan was to divert and go to the seminary and to give his life to the ministry, and that's great and that's good, but I wanted to make sure that this man understood the truth, is that distributors of pickle companies for pickle jars glorify God by feeding and bringing life to the people he created in his image. Frankly, when we get to heaven, I'm going to be out of a job. We're all going to be doing the things that you're doing for all eternity for the glory of God. Now, without the sweat and the unfruitfulness, but we're going to be carrying out economy. We're going to be carrying out stewardship. Now, sir, for certain, there will be aspects of that in a non-fallen world, in a redeemed and eternal state that won't exist, and that's a wonderful thing. But I'm going to be out of work, and we're going to be serving God doing what you do. God's design is that farmers grow, cooks prepare, people distribute, serve, so that someone made in the image of God can eat and be thankful. That's God's sovereign design over that sphere of humanity. So that in whatever we do, whether in the eating or the drinking, do all for the glory of God. That is done by the carrying out of people who sell pickle jars. You, as a job, you're facilitating that. That's God's sovereignty in this world, and He's using you. And this has to do with every aspect of the world. Science, arts, discovery, exploration, accounting. Every aspect of it is needed to carry out what God wants for creation. And they need to be redeemed, right? I think a great aspect of this is like the arts. You know, you got movie makers, you've got photographers, you've got people online on social media. The arts can be about self-expression or personal fulfillment, personal interpretation, feeling things, as our postmodern society uses them for. But that's art outside of the will of God. Art can be used to reflect the beauty of God, the design of God in creation, in the world, and all the things that He's doing in the world, the representation of the image of God in people, and how capable and able and amazing is the image of God in us. The story of creation and redemption in the world, those can all be expressed through the arts in a redemptive way. Teachers, you're not babysitters. You're developing the next generation with the character and skills and abilities they need to be adults in order to carry out creation the way God designed. even if they don't get saved. God's sovereignty is about your work. It's about your parenting. It's about your everything. We are God's stewards over his creation. We're accomplishing his will in the world. He's designed things to be in a certain way. So if you work for government, you're designed as an act of common grace upon the world to bring safety and justice to his creation, people. That's a wonderful aspect of your job that brings meaning to the calling that you have, and it's not just about a paycheck. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as God's stewards of God's varied grace. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, this is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. Titus chapter 1, verse 7, for an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain. So read into that aspect. See all of that. In every area of life, whether like in the book of Romans, politics and government, or in the church, Titus chapter 1, it's stewardship. It's ministry. Luke chapter 12, the Lord said, who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom his master will set over his household to give them their portion of food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all of his possessions. In that short, perhaps even parable, Luke chapter 12, Jesus talks about the pickle jar salesman who is giving God's creation their portion of food at the proper time. And says it's his work. This crowns your job, your occupation. This is why the Bible goes after laziness. Sometimes we think the New Testament isn't concerned with labor, industry, or productivity. It's, the only thing the Bible tells me to do is to make sure I try to share the gospel with my coworkers at work. No, it has a lot to say about how you work and why you work. If we examine the parables in the language of Jesus, we have seen over and over again the call to stewardship, management, fruitfulness, multiplication. It's all there baked in to the design of God. Laziness is a sin that says, God, you haven't given me anything worth doing. God, you're not worth it. And your design is not good. Laziness is a rebellion against the sovereignty of God in the place that he has placed you. I don't care about your sovereign rule. I don't care what you've called me to do. I want me. That's laziness. That's why for so many of us, we need to get control of our feelings about work. Because job satisfaction doesn't come from having the right boss or discovering your personal passion. Job satisfaction comes from knowing that you are doing exactly what God sovereignly designed for you to do and to carry it out because he is worthy. You're part of that. And that part might seem small in your eyes, but it is a necessary part of what God has given you to do. And the Bible even talks about that. Jesus says, hey, you've been given little. Be faithful in that, and you'll be given much. So I am a steward. Nothing belongs to me, and I have a job to do. I have a job to do. Point number 2 is this. As a shrewd steward, I use what I have been given to ensure my future joy. As a shrewd steward, I use what I've been given to assure my future joy. This is where the parable gets confusing, so let me walk you through it. Verse 8, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. There's always a surprise that the Bible throws, that Jesus throws in the parables at the people. And that's the surprise. Wait, hold on. The manager was getting fired because he wasn't good at his job. Then he goes to all the debtors and tells them to cut their debt by percentage so that they'll like him, so that when he's fired and when he doesn't have a job, when he doesn't have income, they'll owe him. And the master sees that and is like, impressed? What is this? Impressed? Look at how Jesus defines it. The sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. In other words, this. You got people, even dishonest people, who are working right alongside you. They went to school with you. They are all across this world. They are not followers of Christ. They have not found salvation through faith in Him and Him alone. But they're really good at one thing. They're really smart in assuring their future. That's what Michael Burry was doing, right? Hedge fund manager, sat there, made money off of all of our collective demise. $100 million for himself. Pretty impressive. And it's not that the master was commending the lies of his former manager. The master was commending the shrewdness. Well, that was wise. That was good priority. You used your time well, and you were smart about it. You were creative in order to secure your future happiness. In fact, if the manager had just been doing that the whole time, using that kind of ingenuity, creativity, that kind of drive, he would have been a good manager and not fired. The problem with the manager in the parable, the problem with Michael Burry, is not only a lack of Christ-centeredness, but the future for which he was preparing. See, Michael Burry was smart to secure his future for here in this generation, amongst these people in this world. What he really needs to do, if he was really smart, he would secure his happiness for the next. That's how Jesus is using the dishonest manager in this parable. He's saying that there are unbelievers in the world who are wise in the things of this world and use them to secure their future. Christians who know God, the disciples, the followers of God, should do that even more. We should be more shrewd, more tactical, more strategic, more aggressive, more focused. Because in a short amount of time, the dishonest manager secured his long-term future. And in this short amount of time, through what has been given to us as stewards, the Lord uses those things and our faithfulness in them to bring us great reward for all eternity. The problem is not their desires, it's not their focus, it's their short-sightedness. He used what little time he had to greatest efficiency. He prioritized the future over the present. And they did it for stupid reasons. How much more should you do it for good reasons? The unrighteous use money to buy favors from friends on earth. We should use our stewardship to make friends who will thank us in heaven. That's one interpretation of it, right? So you get that description there. Verse 9, I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. There's some debate there who these friends are that you're supposed to be making for eternity. Some say it's friends with the angelic host, even God himself, who will receive you into eternal dwellings that he has prepared for you for you who have believed in Jesus Christ, who have followed after him. That's a possible interpretation. I don't think that's what it's meaning, but it's possible. Another interpretation is that the friends that will thank us in eternity are the people that we serve and the people who get ministered to and get saved by our stewardship here on earth. I think the plural of the text and the way it's written in the parable indicates that that is the correct interpretation. And the idea is this: someday you are going to be walking around heaven doing whatever it is we're going to be doing in heaven. Okay? We don't have a lot of description of it, but we do have some. And according to this text, and this interpretation of this text, someone's going to stop you in heaven and be like, hey, wait, you're the one. You're the one who gave to that, and you did this thing, and you spent that extra 10 minutes. And man, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here. In heaven, we'll be forever evaluating and amazed at the work of God and the ways He uses all the things in our lives, from praying great-grandmothers to neighbors who love Jesus, in order to show us Jesus, to get us saved, to bring us into alignment with who He is, to disciple us and to lead us. We'll have that opportunity to see all the ways in which, all the people that God used in our lives in a way that we can't right now. And someday, someone from a far distant place in this life is going to come to you in heaven and be like, hey, did you know when you gave to that missionary, I got saved? Did you know when you discipled that person and shared that truth with them, 5 years later, a more sanctified version of that person taught me the gospel? Did you know that my great-great-great-grandparents were in your church and you sent them a meal when my great-great-grandmother was born, and it ministered to them in a way that proved the love of Christ? That, according to this text, is what's going to happen to you in heaven if you are a shrewd and faithful steward now. Short-sightedness is the problem. Great, wonderful illustration by a local pastor. Long length of rope wrapped all the way around the church several times. Holds up the end of it. Some of you are living for this when the eternity is this. Short-sightedness is the problem. Aggressiveness is the goal. Prioritization of the future is what is wise. Look what Jesus says after the parable, verse 10. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. Now, don't misplace that verse. It sounds very similar to others. One who is faithful in little is given much, but that's not what this parable is saying. This description, Jesus is saying, one who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. One who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. It's an accusation. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. If we can't be faithful with earthly wealth or unrighteous riches, unrighteous wealth according to the text, wealth that's passed around, dirty money in this society, in this fallen world, if we can't be faithful in even that, which isn't even ours to begin with, then how can we be entrusted with true riches? True riches is here referring to stewardship, responsibility in God's kingdom, along with the accompanying heavenly rewards. And the passage is teaching us that money can't own you. Money can't own you. It's a stewardship. Everything is. My family and I have just kind of worked out what this whole next school year is going to look like, right? We have a rhythm of discipleship. Our priorities reflected in our choices and our schedules, the things we say no to and the things we say yes to. And so my wife and I were looking at our weekly schedule when the kids are at school, all the extracurricular activities, small group, Sunday morning. We put things in priority. One of the things that we did that some of you will question is we decided to make Thursday evening family evening where we get to go as a family after the boys get out of school to go and do something fun, even if it costs too much. My wife and I decided, hey, we should take out a credit card. Charge it. So you don't have to worry about the month. And I know for many of us, that's bad stewardship. I get it. But I've got 3 more years with half of my kids. I can worry about that debt later. Right now, I've got a job to do. For some of us, it's a reminder that the call to use your 30s to further your career and secure your financial future is a misallocation of stewardship. Don't miss your children's childhood. Intentionality, priorities, all part of written into what is called biblically stewardship. And to do it well, nothing can own you. You have to be a free and clear worshiper of Christ. Idols stop you from faithfully carrying out the stewardship that God has given you. You want to fix your parenting? Get rid of your idols. Get rid of your idols for this type of life, this type of children. Get rid of your idols of your past, the failures thereof. Get rid of your idols. Money. You want to fix your parenting, you want to fix your marriage. Don't let things own you. Because you can't serve God and be owned by something else. Get focused. Cut it off. Say no. Stop. And give yourself to the callings to which God has called you. And then you'll be unstoppable. John Calvin was the leader, one of the greatest leaders of the Protestant Reformation. He led the preaching of the gospel in Geneva, Switzerland, pastoring a church, proclaiming the truth just like we do every Sunday and more. John Calvin was the theologian whose preaching and theological acumen drove truth into the hearts of Protestants. Changed the world. Saved Western society. Brought us out of the Dark Ages, literally. There was a Roman Catholic cardinal who was attempting to coax Geneva back to the Roman Catholic Church. Wanting to know who his enemies were, he passed through Geneva on the DL, incognito. He wanted to see and to get to know the famous Protestant reformer without being known. And so he walked by his house, a simple home on Cannon Street in Geneva. And the cardinal said, "This can't be John Calvin's home. It's a simple, one-story, plain home with a roof barely hanging on. Did the famous John Calvin, leaders of thousands to whom kings and queens called allegiance to, live in this tiny little place?" The bishops of Rome of the day were in mansions surrounded by wealth and servants. Archbishops and cardinals lived in palaces as kings with kings. And this cardinal was dumbfounded when he knocked on this small door, and John Calvin opened the door himself, dressed in a plain black robe. No servants, just him in the plainest of clothing. The most famous man in the whole city looked like everybody else, answering his own door, cooking his own food. When John Calvin died, the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church said of him, "The strength of that heretic came from the fact that money was nothing to him." It didn't own him, so he could carry out what God called him to do. And he is reaping the reward for his shrewd stewardship. I don't know what it is that lies before you this morning, the thing that God has called you to, but that perhaps you've been hesitant to enter in. Perhaps you're finding your way through the survival stages of parenting and trying to figure out how God is glorified through the changing of diapers. Maybe things are tough at work, and you don't see how what you do is being used by God. See the sovereignty of God, His goodness through you to the world that He created. And even more, as Paul said, each of us who have been saved, who has believed the gospel, are now stewards of that gospel. We owe a debt to the lost. They own us, that we would preach the gospel to them, that we would proclaim it, that we would live it in front of them, our lost family members, our friends, that they would know Christ. That's a part of our stewardship. Be faithful with what God has called you to, because God is using you to bring joy and thankfulness to the world for His glory by His design.